I woke up staring at a rifle. The man holding it had eyes like winter, blue, cold, and unforgiving. He said, "You've got 30 seconds to tell me why you're bleeding on my land." I opened my mouth and realized I had no idea what he was talking about. The world around me came into focus slowly, painfully. Rough wooden walls, a narrow window letting in slants of morning light, the smell of old coffee and leather. My body felt like it had been dragged behind a horse for miles, every muscle screaming, every breath a knife in my ribs. I tried to sit up. The rifle shifted, just slightly, following my movement. "Stay down," the man said. His voice was flat, emotionless, the kind of voice you use when you're deciding whether something lives or dies. "You move again, I'll make that decision for you." I wasn't bleeding on his land, I wanted to say. I was bleeding on his floor. But my throat was so dry the words wouldn't come. I swallowed, tasted copper and dust, and tried again. "Please," I whispered. "I need help." The man didn't lower the rifle. He just studied me, the way you'd study a wounded animal that might still have teeth. After what felt like an eternity, he spoke again. "Who sent you here?" The question didn't make sense. Nobody sent me. I ran. I ran because if I didn't, they would have killed me. But even as I thought it, the memories felt slippery, like trying to hold water in my hands. I remembered fire. I remembered screaming. I remembered my mother's voice, Catherine Brennan, shouting one word over and over: "Run, Iris, run." But I couldn't remember the faces of the men who came. I couldn't remember how I got here, to this cabin, to this man with winter eyes and a rifle that seemed like an extension of his arm. All I knew was that somewhere between the burning and the waking, I had lost pieces of myself. "Nobody," I finally managed. "Nobody sent me." The man's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the window, scanning the land beyond like he expected to see riders coming over the hills. When he looked back at me, something in his expression had shifted. Not softer exactly, but less certain. "What's your name?" he asked. "Iris. Iris Brennan." He nodded once, as if filing that information away. Then he lowered the rifle, just an inch, and set it against the wall within easy reach. "You've got a wound in your side," he said. "Deep. You've lost a lot of blood. If I don't clean it, you'll be dead by morning." I tried to focus on his words, but the room was starting to tilt. The edges of my vision went soft and dark. I felt myself slipping, falling back into that black water where memories lived and died. The last thing I heard was the man's voice, distant now, almost gentle. "Stay with me, Iris Brennan. You don't get to die in my house." When I woke again, the light had changed. Late afternoon, maybe early evening. The pain in my side was still there, but different now. Sharp instead of dull. I looked down and saw clean bandages wrapped around my torso, spotted with blood, but holding. Someone had removed my torn dress and replaced it with a man's shirt. Too big, smelling of soap and wood smoke. The man sat on a wooden stool near the window, watching me. The rifle was still within reach, but his hands were empty now. He held a tin cup, steam rising from it. Coffee, probably. He didn't offer me any. "You're tougher than you look," he said. I didn't feel tough. I felt like I'd been broken into pieces and poorly reassembled, but I wasn't dead. That had to count for something. "Thank you," I said, "for not killing me." A flicker of something passed across his face. Amusement, maybe. Or regret. "Day's not over yet," he said. Then, after a pause, "My name is Josiah Webb. This is my land. Has been for 12 years. And in all that time, I've never had a visitor who wasn't trouble." "I'm not trouble," I said, even though I knew it was a lie. Trouble had followed me here like a shadow, and we both knew it. Josiah took a sip of his coffee, eyes never leaving mine. "Tell me what happened," he said. "All of it. And don't leave anything out. Because if you lie to me, I'll know. And if you lie to me, I'll put you back outside that door and let whatever's hunting you finish the job." So I told him. I told him about the small claim near Silver Mesa, the land my family had worked for 3 generations. I told him about the silver vein my mother and my Aunt Catherine had found, richer than anything we'd ever seen, enough to change our lives. I told him how word spread fast, too fast, and how men came in the night, men with guns and torches and voices like gravel. They wanted the land, I said. They said it belonged to someone else, someone powerful. They said we were trespassing, that we had no rights. My Aunt Catherine, she stood up to them. She said we had papers, legal documents. They laughed, and then they set fire to the house. Josiah's face remained impassive, but his fingers tightened around the tin cup. Go on, he said. I ran, I said. Catherine told me to run, and I did. I went through the back, through the old root cellar. I could hear them behind me, shouting, shooting. I didn't look back. I just ran into the dark, into the hills, and I kept running until my legs gave out. I don't even know how far I came. I just knew I had to get away. And your mother, Josiah asked quietly, where was she? I hesitated. This was the part that didn't make sense. The part that felt like a dream bleeding into reality. My mother died when I was young, I said. At least, that's what Catherine always told me. She raised me. She was the only family I had. Josiah set down his coffee cup. He stood, crossed to a small wooden chest in the corner, and pulled out a folded cloth. When he came back, he handed it to me. It was an old shirt, clean but worn. Put this on, he said. I need to check your bandages. I struggled to sit up, every movement sending fresh waves of pain through my side. Josiah helped me, his hands surprisingly gentle for a man who'd greeted me with a rifle. He unwrapped the bandages carefully, examining the wound beneath. It was long and jagged, a gash that started just below my ribs and curved toward my back. You're lucky, he said. Another inch and it would have hit something vital. As it is, you'll have a scar. A bad one. I can live with scars, I said. Josiah didn't respond. He was staring at my back, his expression frozen. For a long moment, he didn't move, didn't speak, just stared. What is it? I asked, trying to twist around to see. He stepped back, his face pale. Where did you get that? He said. His voice was barely above a whisper. Get what? Josiah crossed to a small mirror on the wall and angled it so I could see my reflection. I turned, pulling the shirt down to expose my shoulder blades. And there it was, a tattoo, large and intricate, covering most of my upper back. I'd had it for as long as I could remember, so long that I barely noticed it anymore. My father had done it when I was 8 years old, before he died. He told me it was for protection, a symbol of our family, a way to keep me safe. It looked like geometric patterns, lines and angles intersecting in complex ways. Beautiful, in its own stark manner. I'd always thought it was just art, something meaningful only to my father. But the way Josiah was looking at it, the way his hands trembled slightly as he stepped closer, told me it was something more. This isn't a tattoo, he said. This is a map. I stared at him. What? Josiah traced one of the lines with his finger, not quite touching my skin. These patterns, these angles, they're not decorative. They're topographical. See here, this cluster of small marks, that's a ridge line. And this curve, that's a river. Your father didn't just tattoo you, Iris. He marked you with coordinates, with directions. To what? I asked, my heart starting to pound. Josiah met my eyes. To the richest silver vein in Montana. And if I'm right about where this leads, it's not just your land that's at stake. It's land that belongs to the Shosonyi, to the federal government, and to a man named Gareth Sloan. A man who would kill 1,000 people to keep this secret buried. The name hit me like a fist. Gareth Sloan. I'd heard it before, whispered in the dark by Catherine when she thought I was asleep. Gareth Sloan, the man who owned half of Montana and wanted the other half. Gareth Sloan, who crushed anyone who stood in his way. He's the one who sent the men, I said. The ones who burned our house. Josiah nodded slowly. And he won't stop until you're dead. Because as long as you're alive, as long as that map is on your skin, you're a threat to everything he's built. I felt the world tilt again, but this time it wasn't from blood loss. It was from the weight of understanding. My father hadn't given me protection. He'd given me a death sentence. And now I was trapped in a stranger's cabin, bleeding and broken, with nowhere to run and no one to trust. Josiah seemed to read my thoughts. He picked up the rifle again, but this time he didn't point it at me. He walked to the window and looked out at the fading light. They'll come, he said. Sloan's men. They'll follow your trail, and they'll come here. We have maybe a day, maybe less. I asked, you're going to help me? Josiah didn't turn around. I didn't say that, he said. What I said is, they'll come. And when they do, you need to be somewhere they can't find you. He crossed to a worn rug in the center of the room and pulled it aside, revealing a trapdoor cut into the floorboards. It was seamless, invisible unless you knew where to look. Josiah lifted it, hinges groaning softly. Below was darkness, a ladder descending into shadow. Down there, he said, there's a cellar. It's hidden, reinforced. Sloan's men could tear this cabin apart and never find it. You stay down there until I tell you it's safe. And if you don't tell me, I asked, if they kill you, then you wait until dark and you run. You run east toward Fort Benton and you find a man named Colonel Silas Hayes. You tell him Josiah Webb sent you. He'll know what to do. I stared at the black hole in the floor, at the ladder disappearing into nothing. Every instinct I had screamed at me not to go down there, not to trust this stranger, not to put my life in his hands. But what choice did I have? The men who wanted me dead were coming, and Josiah Webb, for whatever reason, was offering me a chance. I started to stand, but my legs buckled. Josiah caught me, his grip firm, and helped me to the edge of the trapdoor. Before I climbed down, I looked at him. Why are you doing this? I asked. You don't know me. You don't owe me anything. Josiah's expression was unreadable. No, he said, I don't. But I know what it's like to lose everything because you trusted the wrong person. And I know what it's like to live with that for the rest of your life. He handed me a blanket and a canteen of water. Now go, he said. And whatever you hear up here, whatever happens, you don't make a sound. You understand? I nodded, and then I descended into the dark. The cellar was cold and damp, smelling of earth and old wood. I could barely see my hand in front of my face. As my eyes adjusted, I made out the dim shapes of shelves, boxes, barrels. Supplies, maybe? Or things Josiah wanted to keep hidden. I sat down on the dirt floor, pulling the blanket around my shoulders and listened. For a long time, there was nothing. Just the sound of my own breathing, the creak of the floorboards above as Josiah moved around. I closed my eyes and tried not to think about what would happen if he failed. If Sloan's men found me down here. And then I heard it. A soft sound, barely audible. A cough. I froze. It hadn't come from above. It had come from somewhere else in the cellar. I wasn't alone. My heart hammered in my chest. I wanted to call out, to ask who was there, but Josiah's words echoed in my mind. Don't make a sound. I forced myself to stay still, to breathe quietly, to listen. The sound came again, a cough, wet and labored, and then a voice, thin and raspy, a woman's voice. Who's there, it said. Who did he bring this time? I didn't answer. Couldn't answer. Because the voice, even through the strain and the years, was familiar. It was a voice I'd heard in dreams, in fragments of memory I'd thought were imagined. A voice I'd been told belonged to someone dead. The voice spoke again, closer now, as if the woman had moved. Please, she said, if you're real, if you're not just another ghost, say something. I found my voice, barely a whisper. Who are you? A long silence. And then, so quiet I almost didn't hear it, the woman said, My name is Lydia Brennan, and if Josiah brought you down here, then you must be my daughter. The world stopped. Everything stopped. Because the woman in the dark, the woman with the broken voice and the labored breathing, had just said my mother's name. The mother I'd been told was dead. The mother I'd mourned without ever really knowing. I tried to speak, but no words came. My mind was spinning. Fragments of my life rearranging themselves into a pattern I didn't recognize. Catherine had lied to me. Or maybe she'd been protecting me. Or maybe everything I thought I knew was a lie built on top of other lies. And the truth was buried so deep I'd never find it. Lydia spoke again, and now I could hear the tears in her voice. Iris, she said, is that you? Is that really you? I forced myself to move, to crawl toward the sound of her voice. My hands found wooden bars, cold iron, a cage. They'd built a cage down here, and someone was inside it. I reached through the bars, and a hand, thin and trembling, grasped mine. "It's me," I whispered. "It's Iris." And then Lydia Brennan, the mother I'd never known, the ghost made flesh, began to cry. And I cried with her, two women in the dark, holding hands through iron bars, while above us, the man who'd kept us both prisoner prepared to face the monsters at the door. Time moved differently in the dark. Minutes felt like hours. I sat on the cold dirt floor, my hands still clutching Lydia's through the bars, and waited for my mind to catch up with reality. This woman, this stranger, claimed to be my mother. The mother I'd been told died when I was an infant. The mother whose face I'd never seen, whose voice I'd never heard, whose existence had been reduced to a single sentence. "She's gone, Iris. She loved you, but she's gone." Catherine had said those words to me 100 times growing up. Every time I asked about my mother, every time I wondered why I had no memories of her, Catherine would give me that same answer. And I believed her. Why wouldn't I? Catherine was the only family I had, the only person in the world who cared whether I lived or died. But now, in the cellar, with Lydia's hand gripping mine like I might disappear if she let go, I understood. Catherine had lied. Or maybe she told the truth in the only way she knew how. Gone didn't always mean dead. Sometimes it just meant lost. Lydia's breathing was uneven, rattling in her chest with every inhale. "How long have you been down here?" I asked. 12 years, she said. 12 years in the dark. The number hit me like a stone. 12 years. I'd been 13 when Josiah Webb first came to this land, first built this cabin, first dug this cellar, which meant Lydia had been here, locked in this cage, for almost half my life. While I was learning to read, learning to cook, learning to survive on a piece of land that was never really ours, my mother was suffering in silence beneath a stranger's floor. Why, I asked, why would he do this? Lydia was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was stronger, steadier. "Because he's protecting me," she said. "From Gareth Sloan, from the men who would kill me if they knew I was alive, and from myself." I didn't understand. Protecting you from yourself? Lydia's hand tightened on mine. "I wasn't always like this, Iris. Weak, afraid. There was a time when I fought, when I screamed and clawed and did everything I could to escape. But Sloan, he broke something in me. Something I don't think I'll ever get back. The first year Josiah kept me down here, I tried to kill myself 3 times. He stopped me every time. Eventually, I stopped trying. I just existed." My throat tightened. I wanted to tell her I understood, but I didn't. I couldn't imagine 12 years in a cage, 12 years without sunlight, without hope. I couldn't imagine what that would do to a person's mind. "How did you end up here?" I asked. "How did Josiah find you?" Lydia shifted in the darkness. I could hear the scrape of chains, the rattle of iron. "Sloan took me 16 years ago," she said. "I was young then, barely older than you are now. Your father, Daniel Brennan, was a mining engineer. Brilliant man, honest. He discovered a silver vein that ran beneath 3 different land claims: Shosonyi territory, federal land, and a piece of land Sloan had stolen years before. Daniel knew if the truth came out, Sloan would lose everything. So Sloan decided to make sure the truth never came out." I felt my chest tighten. "What did he do?" Lydia's voice cracked. "He killed your father, made it look like an accident, a collapse in one of the mines. But before he died, Daniel managed to hide the proof. He drew a map, coded it, and tattooed it onto you when you were 8 years old, just before Sloan came for us. The only thing Sloan wouldn't think to destroy was a child." I closed my eyes, felt the weight of the ink on my back. My father's last act hadn't been love. It had been strategy. He turned me into a living document, a piece of evidence that could bring down an empire. And he'd sent me into the world not knowing what I carried. "Sloan found out about the map eventually," Lydia continued. "He came for you when you were just a baby. But Catherine, my sister, she hid you. She took you and ran, and she never stopped running. Sloan took me instead. He thought if he kept me alive, if he threatened to kill me, Catherine would bring you back, but she never did. She was stronger than I ever was." A tear slid down my cheek. Catherine had saved me. She'd raised me, protected me, lied to me, all to keep me alive. And now she was dead. Burned alive in a house that wasn't even ours, on land that had been stolen from us before I was born. Josiah found me 12 years ago, Lydia said. He was tracking Sloan for different reasons, personal reasons. When he raided one of Sloan's camps, he found me locked in a wagon, half dead, covered in scars. He should have left me there, should have let me die, but he didn't. He brought me here, and he's kept me safe ever since. Safe, I repeated. You're in a cage. Lydia's laugh was bitter. I know how it looks, Iris. But Josiah, he's not a cruel man. He's a broken one. He lost his own family to Sloan, his wife, his daughter. He couldn't save them, so he saves people like me, people who are already lost. He gives them a place where the monsters can't reach them, even if that place is a cage. Above us, the floorboards creaked. Heavy footsteps, more than one person. I heard Josiah's voice, calm and measured, and another voice I didn't recognize. Rough, gravelly, the kind of voice that belonged to a man who'd spent his life hurting people. Lydia's hand went rigid in mine. They're here, she whispered. Sloan's men. My heart began to race. I wanted to move, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The cellar was sealed. The only way out was the trapdoor above, and Sloan's men were standing on it. Don't make a sound, Lydia hissed. No matter what you hear, don't make a sound. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me in the dark. I pressed myself against the wall, wrapped the blanket tighter around my shoulders, and listened. The voice above was asking questions. Have you seen a woman? Brown hair, green eyes, injured. She came through here. We know she did. We followed the blood. Josiah's response was flat, uninterested. I see a lot of things out here. Deer, coyotes, the occasional drifter, but I haven't seen any woman. The other man laughed, a cold sound. You're lying, Webb. We know you're lying. Sloan said you'd lie. Said you protect her because that's what you do. You collect broken things. There was a pause. Then the sound of something heavy hitting wood. A fist, maybe. Or the butt of a rifle. Sloan also said if we find her here, we burn this place to the ground with you in it, the man continued. So I'll ask you one more time. Where is she? Josiah didn't answer. Not with words. I heard the metallic click of a rifle being cocked. Heard the sudden scuffle of boots on wood. And then, a voice I recognized, calm, steady, deadly. You're standing in my house, Josiah said. Uninvited, unwelcome. You've got 10 seconds to leave before I put a bullet in you. The other man laughed again, but this time it was forced, nervous. You don't have the stones, Webb. Josiah's voice dropped to a whisper, but I heard every word. I've killed better men than you for less. Try me. A long silence. Then the scrape of boots retreating toward the door. This isn't over, the man said. Sloan will hear about this. And when he does, you'll wish you'd cooperated. The door slammed. Footsteps faded. I waited, counting my heartbeats until the sound of hooves echoed in the distance. Only then did I let myself breathe. Lydia exhaled shakily beside me. He sent them away, she said. But they'll be back. With more men, more guns. Sloan doesn't forgive. He doesn't forget. I pulled my hand from hers and stood, my legs unsteady. I need to see him, I said. I need to talk to Josiah. Lydia grabbed my wrist. Iris, wait. There's something you need to know. About Josiah. About why he's really helping you. I paused. What do you mean? He didn't just find me by accident, Lydia said. He was hunting Sloan. And the reason he was hunting Sloan is because 12 years ago, Sloan killed his family, his wife, his 8-year-old daughter. Sloan burned them alive in their home, just like he did to Catherine. Josiah swore revenge. He spent 12 years preparing, waiting. And now, with you here, with that map on your back, he finally has the weapon he needs. I felt a chill run down my spine. So I'm not a person to him. I'm a tool. Lydia's voice softened. I don't know, Iris. Maybe at first that's what you were. But I've been listening to him for 12 years. I've heard him talk to himself when he thinks no one's listening. I've heard him cry. And I know this. Whatever Josiah Webb is, he's not a monster. He's just a man trying to do one good thing before he dies. I climbed the ladder, my hands shaking, and pushed against the trapdoor. It didn't budge. locked from above. I knocked. 3 sharp raps. A moment later, the door lifted. Josiah's face appeared, lined with exhaustion. "You heard?" he said. I heard. He helped me out of the cellar, then lowered the door and replaced the rug. His hands were steady, but his eyes were distant. "They'll come back," he said. "Tomorrow, maybe the day after. With enough men to tear this place apart. We don't have much time." "Then we leave," I said. "Tonight. We take Lydia and we run." Josiah shook his head. "Lydia can't run. She's too weak. And even if she could, they'd track us. Sloan has the best trackers in the territory. We wouldn't make it 10 miles. "So what do we do?" I asked. "Just wait here to die?" Josiah crossed to the window and looked out at the darkening sky. "No," he said. "We fight. But not here. Not on Sloan's terms. We take the fight to him. We find allies. People with power, people Sloan can't buy or intimidate. And we use that map on your back to bury him." I stared at him. "You want to go after Sloan? You want to walk straight into the lion's den?" Josiah turned to face me. His eyes were cold, but beneath the ice, I saw something else. Desperation, hope. The faint flicker of a man who'd been dead inside for 12 years and was finally remembering what it felt like to be alive. "I want justice," he said. "For my family. For yours. For every person Sloan has destroyed. And you, Iris Brennan, you're the only chance we have of getting it." I thought about Catherine, about the way she'd scream my name as the flames consumed her. I thought about Lydia, locked in a cage for 12 years, her life stolen by a man who saw people as obstacles to be removed. I thought about my father, Daniel Brennan, who'd loved me enough to turn me into a weapon, even if it meant I'd never know peace. And I thought about myself, about the girl I'd been, running through the dark, terrified and alone, and the woman I was becoming, standing in a stranger's cabin, bleeding and broken but still breathing. "Okay," I said. "Tell me what we need to do." Josiah's expression didn't change, but I saw the tension leave his shoulders. "First," he said, "we need to get you strong enough to ride. You've lost a lot of blood. You need rest, food, time to heal. We have maybe 3 days before Sloan's men come back in force. And then we ride to Fort Benton. There's a man there, Colonel Silas Hayes. He's federal military, one of the few men in Montana who can't be bought. He owes me a favor, a big one. If I can get you to him, if I can show him that map, he can bring the full weight of the U.S. Army down on Sloan." "And Lydia?" I asked. Josiah's jaw tightened. "Lydia stays here, hidden. They. Once Sloan is dealt with, we come back for her." I wanted to argue, wanted to say we couldn't leave her behind. But the truth was, Lydia was right. She couldn't run. And dragging her with us would only slow us down, make us easier to catch. The best way to save her was to end this, to end Sloan. "All right," I said, 3 days, and then we ride." Josiah nodded. "Get some rest," he said. "I'll keep watch tonight. Tomorrow, we start preparing." I climbed onto the narrow cot by the window, every muscle in my body aching. As I closed my eyes, I heard Josiah moving around the cabin, checking the rifle, barring the door. A man preparing for war. And in the cellar below, I knew Lydia was listening, praying, hoping that this time the monsters wouldn't win. I didn't sleep, not really. I drifted in and out of a restless half-consciousness, my mind replaying the day's revelations over and over. My mother was alive. My father had turned me into a map. Gareth Sloan wanted me dead, and Josiah Webb, a man I'd met less than 24 hours ago, was now the only thing standing between me and annihilation. When the first light of dawn crept through the window, I opened my eyes to find Josiah sitting at the table, cleaning his rifle. He didn't look like he'd slept either. "Hungry?" he asked without looking up. I nodded. He stood, crossed to the stove, and ladled something from a pot into a wooden bowl. "Venison stew," he said, handing it to me. "It's not much, but it'll keep you alive." I ate slowly, the warm food settling in my stomach like a stone. Josiah watched me in silence, and I wondered what he saw when he looked at me. A weapon? A burden? or just another broken thing he couldn't save. When I finished, I set the bowl aside and met his gaze. "Tell me about your daughter," I said. Josiah's expression didn't change, but his hand stilled on the rifle. "Why?" "Because I need to know who I'm doing this for. If we're going to war with Sloan, I need to understand what's at stake." Josiah was quiet for a long time. Then, finally, he spoke. Her name was Amelia. She was 8 years old. She liked horses and wildflowers and stories about knights and dragons. She used to make me promise every night before bed that I'd keep her safe, that I'd never let the monsters get her. His voice cracked. "I promised her, Iris. Every single night I promised. And then one night, I wasn't there. I was hunting a man named Gareth Sloan, trying to bring him to justice. And while I was gone, Sloan sent his men to my house. They locked the doors. They set it on fire. And they stood outside and listened to my wife and daughter scream. I felt tears sting my eyes. "I'm sorry," I whispered. Josiah shook his head. "Sorry doesn't bring them back. Sorry doesn't change what happened. All I have left is this. A chance to make Sloan pay. A chance to keep one promise, even if it's 12 years too late." He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the land he'd called home for over a decade. "This place," he said, "it was supposed to be a refuge. A place where the past couldn't find me. But the past always finds you, doesn't it, Iris? No matter how far you run." I joined him at the window, my side aching with every step. We stood there together, two people bound by grief and vengeance, watching the sun rise over a land that had taken everything from us. And in that moment, I made a choice. I wasn't going to run anymore. I wasn't going to hide. I was going to take the weapon my father had given me, the map carved into my skin, and I was going to use it to burn Gareth Sloan's world to the ground, even if it killed me. 2 days passed like a slow death. Josiah kept me inside, kept the windows shuttered, kept watch from the shadows like a man who'd forgotten what it meant to sleep. I healed slowly, my body knitting itself back together, one painful breath at a time. The wound in my side stopped bleeding, started scabbing, began the long process of becoming a scar I'd carry for the rest of my life. On the morning of the third day, Josiah woke me before dawn. "Time to learn," he said, and handed me a rifle. We went outside into the gray light before sunrise, when the world was still quiet and the air tasted like frost. Josiah set up targets, old bottles and wooden posts, things that wouldn't shoot back. He showed me how to hold the rifle, how to breathe, how to let the weapon become an extension of my body rather than a foreign object in my hands. "You're not aiming to scare," he said, adjusting my stance. "You're aiming to stop. There's a difference. A scared man keeps coming. A stopped man stays down." I fired. The recoil jarred my shoulder, sent pain screaming through my wounded side. The bottle I'd been aiming at remained intact, mocking me from 30 yards away. "Again," Josiah said. I fired, missed, fired again, missed again. My hands were shaking, my breath coming too fast, my mind filled with the image of men with torches and guns, men who wanted me dead. "Stop thinking," Josiah said quietly. "Your mind is your enemy right now. Let your body do the work." I closed my eyes, took a breath, and when I opened them, I didn't see the bottle anymore. I saw the face of the man who'd burned Catherine alive. I saw Gareth Sloan, a man I'd never met but whose shadow had followed me my entire life. I saw every person who'd ever made me run, ever made me hide, ever made me feel like my existence was a burden the world couldn't bear. I fired. The bottle exploded into 1,000 glittering pieces. Josiah nodded once. "Good," he said. "Now do it again." We trained for hours. By the time the sun was fully up, my shoulder was bruised, my hands were blistered, and I could hit a target at 50 yards more often than I missed. It wasn't expertise, it wasn't mastery, but it was enough to keep me alive for a few seconds longer than I would have been yesterday. When we went back inside, I found Lydia waiting at the top of the cellar ladder. Josiah had let her out, a mercy he granted once a day when he was certain no one was watching. She looked like a ghost in the morning light, pale and insubstantial, her hair hanging in thin white strands around her gaunt face. But when she saw me, when she looked at me with eyes that were the same green as mine, she smiled. You're getting stronger, she said. I have to, I replied. We leave tomorrow. Lydia's smile faded. She looked at Josiah, who was cleaning the rifle, his back to both of us. Does he know the risks? She asked. Does he know what Sloan will do if he catches you? I know, Josiah said without turning around. I've always known. Lydia crossed to him, her movement slow and painful, like someone who'd forgotten how to use their own body. Josiah, she said softly, you don't have to do this. You've kept me alive for 12 years. You don't owe me anything more. You don't owe her anything at all. Josiah set down the rifle and turned to face her. Maybe not, he said, but I owe Amelia. I owe my wife. I owe every person Sloan has destroyed. And if there's even a chance that this map, that this girl, can bring him down, then I have to take it. Because if I don't, I'll spend the rest of my life wondering if I could have saved someone. Anyone. Lydia reached out and touched his face, a gesture so intimate I had to look away. You're a good man, Josiah Webb, she whispered, even if you don't believe it. That afternoon, as the sun began its descent toward the western mountains, we heard the sound of hooves. A single rider approaching fast. Josiah was at the window instantly, rifle in hand. He watched for a long moment, then lowered the weapon. It's all right, he said. I know this one. I joined him at the window and saw a woman riding toward the cabin. She was young, maybe 30, dressed in practical traveling clothes, but with an elegance that spoke of money and education. Her horse was a beautiful chestnut mare, the kind of animal that costs more than most people earned in a year. She rode with the confidence of someone who'd been in a saddle since childhood. Who is she? I asked. Josiah's expression was unreadable. Her name is Adelaide Mercer, he said. And if she's here, it means Sloan knows exactly where you are. My heart sank. She works for him? No, Josiah said. She works against him. But the fact that she found you means Sloan's not far behind. Adelaide dismounted in front of the cabin, tied her horse, and walked to the door. She knocked 3 times, a deliberate pattern. Josiah opened the door, but didn't invite her in. Miss Mercer, he said. This is unexpected. Adelaide smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Mr. Webb, she said. Always a pleasure. May I come in? I have information that might keep your guest alive past sunset. Josiah stepped aside. Adelaide entered, her gaze sweeping the cabin before landing on me. She studied me for a long moment, taking in my borrowed clothes, my bandaged side, the way I stood between her and the trapdoor like I was protecting something below. You must be Iris Brennan, Adelaide said. I've heard a great deal about you, or rather about what's on your back. I didn't respond. I just watched her, trying to decide if she was friend or enemy. In my experience, people who showed up unannounced were rarely either. They were opportunists, and opportunists only cared about one thing: themselves. Adelaide seemed to sense my distrust. She turned to Josiah. Tell her who I am, she said. Tell her why she can trust me. Josiah closed the door and barred it. 10 years ago, he said, Adelaide Mercer was kidnapped by Gareth Sloan. He held her for 3 weeks, threatening to kill her unless her father, Governor Mercer, signed over federal land rights. I was still a marshal then. I found her, got her out, took a bullet in the process. Adelaide's been in my debt ever since. Adelaide nodded. My father used every resource at his disposal to protect Mr. Webb after that. Sloan wanted him dead, wanted to make an example of him. But my father made sure Sloan couldn't touch him. For 12 years, Josiah Webb has been untouchable. A ghost Sloan couldn't find. Until now, I said. Adelaide's expression darkened. Until now. My father died 3 weeks ago. Heart failure. The new governor is a man named Richard Cross, and Cross is in Sloan's pocket. The protection Josiah had, the shield that kept him safe, it's gone. And Sloan knows it. That's why his men came, Josiah said quietly. Not just for Iris. For me. Adelaide nodded. Sloan's been waiting 12 years for this. He's not just going to kill you, Josiah. He's going to destroy you. Slowly. Publicly. He wants the whole territory to know what happens to people who cross him. So why are you here? I asked. If your father's dead, if your protection is gone, Why risk coming here at all? Adelaide met my gaze. Because I believe in finishing what you start, she said. My father spent his entire career fighting men like Sloan, men who think power gives them the right to take whatever they want. I'm not going to let his death mean nothing, and I'm not going to let Sloan win. She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out a folded map. I have a plan, she said, spreading the map on Josiah's table. But it requires trust, and it requires all three of us working together. I looked at the map. It showed Montana Territory, the vast expanse of land between the Canadian border and Wyoming. Adelaide pointed to a spot in the western part of the territory, near the Bitterroot Range. This is Shoshone land, she said. Specifically, the land of Chief Maddo Whitehawk. The silver vein on your back, Iris, it runs directly through his territory. Which means if we can get Chief Whitehawk to testify, to confirm that Sloan has been illegally mining on Shoshone land, we have grounds for a federal investigation. Josiah frowned. The Shoshone don't trust the federal government. They've been betrayed too many times. Why would Chief Whitehawk help us? Because Sloan killed his son-in-law 3 months ago, Adelaide said. Made it look like a cattle theft. The chief knows it was murder, but he has no proof. No witnesses. If we can give him justice for his family, he'll give us the testimony we need. And how do we do that? I asked. Adelaide pointed to another spot on the map, Fort Benton. We take you to Colonel Silas Hayes. We show him the map on your back. We bring Chief Whitehawk as a witness, and we force Hayes to open an investigation. Once the Army gets involved, Sloan can't hide. He can't bribe his way out. He'll be arrested, tried, and convicted. It was a good plan. A smart plan. But it had one fatal flaw. We'll never make it to Fort Benton, I said. Sloan's men are watching this place. The moment we leave, they'll follow us. They'll run us down before we get 10 miles. Adelaide smiled. Not if we have an escort. I didn't come alone, Mr. Webb. I brought 20 men with me. Federal marshals, loyal to my father's memory. They're camped 2 miles east, waiting for my signal. With them protecting us, we can make it to Chief Whitehawk's camp. And from there, to Fort Benton. Josiah looked at her for a long moment. Why, he asked. You've already lost your father. You have no obligation to us. Why risk your life for this? Adelaide's smile faded. Because Sloan took something from me too, she said quietly. Not my life, not my family, but my sense of safety. My belief that the law mattered, that justice existed. I was 20 years old when he kidnapped me. I spent 3 weeks in a wagon, chained to a wall, listening to men discuss whether it would be easier to kill me or keep me alive. And when you saved me, Josiah, when you put a bullet in the man guarding me and carried me out of that camp, I promised myself I would never be helpless again. I would never let another man make me afraid. She looked at me. Sloan made you run, Iris. He made you afraid. And he'll keep doing it to other women, other families, until someone stops him. I intend to be that someone. I felt something shift in my chest. This woman, this stranger, understood what it meant to be hunted, to be reduced to prey, and she was offering me a way to fight back. All right, I said. What do we need to do? Adelaide began to roll up the map. First, we need to move. Tonight. My men will create a distraction. Draw Sloan's watchers away from the cabin. While they're occupied, the 3 of us ride east to the rendezvous point. From there, we head to Chief Whitehawk's camp. And Lydia, I asked, glancing at Josiah. Josiah's jaw tightened. Lydia stays here. Hidden. Once Sloan is dealt with, I'll come back for her. Before I could argue, the trapdoor opened. Lydia climbed out, her movements slow but determined. She looked at Adelaide, then at Josiah, then at me. I heard everything, she said. And Josiah's right. I'll only slow you down. But before you go, there's something you need to know. She crossed to me, reached into the pocket of her ragged dress, and pulled out a small silver locket. She pressed it into my hand. This belonged to your father, she said. He gave it to me the night before Sloan killed him. Inside, there's a photograph and a message. He wanted you to have it, Iris. He wanted you to know that everything he did because he loved you. I opened the locket with trembling fingers. Inside was a faded photograph of a man with kind eyes and a serious expression. My father, Daniel Brennan. Beneath the photograph, engraved in tiny letters, were the words, "The truth lives longer than the liar." Lydia's eyes filled with tears. "He knew Sloan would come for us," she said. "He knew we might not survive. But he believed that you would. He believed that one day you'd be strong enough to finish what he started." I closed the locket and held it tight. "I won't let him down," I said. Lydia smiled, a sigh, broken thing. "I know you won't," she whispered. "You're your father's daughter. And that makes you more dangerous than Sloan could ever imagine." That night, as darkness fell over the Montana wilderness, we prepared to leave. Adelaide's men created the promised distraction, setting fires in the hills to the west, drawing Sloan's watchers away from the cabin. Josiah saddled 3 horses, packed supplies, and gave me a rifle that felt less foreign in my hands than it had 2 days ago. Before we mounted, I went down to the cellar one last time. Lydia was sitting on the dirt floor, wrapped in blankets, her face pale in the dim light of a single candle. "I'll come back for you," I promised. "When this is over, I'll come back." Lydia reached up and touched my cheek. "I know," she said, "and I'll be waiting. I've waited 16 years, Iris. I can wait a little longer." I climbed the ladder, and Josiah lowered the trapdoor. He locked it, replaced the rug, and looked at me. "Ready?" he asked. "No," I said. "But let's go anyway." We rode east through the darkness, Adelaide in the lead, Josiah bringing up the rear, and me in the middle, trying not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. The land was rough, unforgiving, full of hidden ravines and treacherous footing, but Adelaide knew the terrain, guided us with the confidence of someone who'd ridden these trails 100 times. After 2 hours, we reached the rendezvous point. 20 men waited there, armed and ready, their faces hard in the firelight. Adelaide dismounted and spoke to their leader, a tall man with gray hair and a marshal's badge pinned to his chest. He nodded, gave orders, and within minutes we were moving again, this time with an escort that made me feel almost safe. Almost. We rode through the night, stopping only to rest the horses and drink from canteens. By dawn, we'd covered nearly 40 miles. Adelaide led us into a narrow valley, sheltered by pine trees and hidden from the main trails. "This is as far as we go with the marshals," she said. "Chief Whitehawk's camp is 10 miles north. If we ride in with 20 armed men, he'll see it as a threat. We go alone from here." The marshal with the gray hair didn't look happy. "Miss Mercer," he said, "I can't protect you if you send us away." Adelaide smiled. "I don't need protection, Marshal. I have Mr. Webb, and I have Iris. That's more than enough." The marshal looked at Josiah, who nodded once. The marshal sighed, gave the order, and his men rode west, back toward Fort Benton, leaving the 3 of us alone in the wilderness. We continued north, following a river that cut through the valley like a silver thread. The morning was cold, the air sharp with the promise of winter. I pulled my coat tighter and tried to ignore the ache in my side, the exhaustion that made every movement feel like wading through deep water. Josiah rode beside me. "You're doing well," he said. "Better than I expected." "I'm terrified," I admitted. "Good," he said. "Fear keeps you sharp. It's the people who aren't afraid who get themselves killed." Adelaide glanced back at us. "We're close," she said. "Another mile, maybe less. When we get there, let me do the talking." Chief Whitehawk knows me, trusts me as much as he trusts any white person. But if he senses deception, if he thinks we're using him, he'll send us away. Or worse. "What's worse?" I asked. Adelaide's expression was grim. "The Shoshone don't take kindly to liars," she said, "especially liars who come to their land asking for favors. Just follow my lead, stay quiet, and let me handle this." We crested a ridge and looked down into a shallow basin. Below us, I saw the Shoshone camp, 24 lodges arranged in a circle, smoke rising from cook fires, horses grazing in a makeshift corral. People moved between the lodges, going about their daily lives, unaware that 3 strangers were watching from above. Adelaide dismounted. "We walk from here," she said, leading our horses. "It's a sign of respect." We descended into the basin, and as we approached the camp, people stopped what they were doing and turned to watch us. Children ran to their mothers. Men reached for weapons. An old woman emerged from one of the lodges, her face lined with age and wisdom, and spoke sharply in a language I didn't understand. Adelaide responded in the same language, her words slow and careful. The old woman studied her, then nodded and called out. A moment later, a man emerged from the largest lodge. He was tall, broad shouldered, his hair streaked with gray, his face marked with scars that spoke of a hard life. He wore traditional clothing mixed with practical elements boots and a leather vest over beaded buckskin. Chief Maddo Whitehawk, Adelaide said, switching back to English. It's been too long. The chief looked at her, then at Josiah, then at me. His eyes narrowed. Adelaide Mercer, he said, his English accented but clear. You come to my camp with the man who once hunted my people and a girl who carries the mark of thieves on her skin. Why should I not turn you away? Because we share an enemy, Adelaide said, and because I'm offering you something you've wanted for a long time, justice. The chief's expression didn't change. Justice is a white man's word, he said. It means nothing to my people. We have seen your justice. It protects the powerful and punishes the weak. Then let me offer you something better, Adelaide said. Revenge. The chief's eyes flickered with interest. He gestured toward the largest lodge. Come, he said, we will talk. Inside the lodge, it was warm and dim, lit by a small fire in the center. We sat in a circle, the chief across from us, his daughter Naomi beside him. She was young, maybe my age, dressed in a mix of traditional and modern clothing. Her eyes were red, as if she'd been crying recently, but her expression was hard, unyielding. Chief Whitehawk looked at Adelaide. Speak, he said. Adelaide took a breath. 3 months ago, your daughter's husband was killed, she said. The white men said he was stealing cattle. But you know the truth. He was murdered because he discovered something. Something Gareth Sloan wanted to keep hidden. The chief's jaw tightened. How do you know this? Because Sloan has done it before, Adelaide said. He's killed dozens of people, maybe hundreds, to protect his secrets, and he'll keep killing until someone stops him. Naomi spoke for the first time, her voice sharp with grief and anger. No one stops Gareth Sloan, she said. He owns the law. He owns the land. He owns everything. Not everything, I said. The words came out before I could stop them. Everyone turned to look at me. Naomi's eyes were like daggers. And who are you, she asked, to tell me what Sloan owns? I'm the daughter of a man he murdered, I said. I'm the niece of a woman he burned alive, and I'm the person who's going to bring him down. Naomi laughed, bitter and cold. You? One girl with a wounded side and borrowed clothes? You think you can destroy Sloan? I stood, ignoring the pain that shot through my ribs, and pulled off my shirt. The bandages were still wrapped around my torso, but my back was exposed. The tattoo, the map, every line and angle visible in the firelight. This is why, I said. This map shows the location of the largest silver vein in Montana, and it proves that Sloan has been illegally mining on Shoshone land for over a decade. If we can get this map to the federal authorities, if we can get your father to testify, Sloan will lose everything. Chief Whitehawk stood and approached me. He studied the tattoo, his eyes tracing the lines, the patterns. After a long moment, he spoke. This map, he said. It is real? It's real, Josiah said. I've seen the land it describes. I've walked those ridges. This girl is telling the truth. The chief looked at his daughter. Naomi, he said, what do you think? Naomi stood and walked around me, examining the tattoo from every angle. Finally, she stopped in front of me. If this is real, she said, if this can hurt Sloan, then I will help you. But I have one condition. Name it, Adelaide said. Naomi's eyes burned with a fierce, terrible light. When Sloan falls, she said, I want to be there. I want to see his face when he realizes he's lost. I want him to know that my husband's death was not in vain. Chief Whitehawk nodded slowly. Then it is decided, he said. You may enter the sacred cave, the place where the silver vein runs deepest, but only the girl may go, and she may take only what she needs. I pulled my shirt back on. When do we leave? Now, Naomi said, before Sloan's men find us. We left the lodge and walked to the edge of the camp, where the land began to rise into steep, rocky hills. Naomi led the way, moving with the sureness of someone who knew every stone and tree. Adelaide and Josiah followed, but when we reached a narrow cleft in the rock, Naomi held up her hand. Only Iris, she said. My father's orders. Josiah looked at me. Are you sure about this? No, I said. But I'm doing it anyway. Naomi handed me a torch. Follow the path, she said. It goes deep, but it's safe. At the end, you'll find the silver. Take a sample, enough to prove your claim. But take no more. The mountain does not forgive greed. I took the torch and stepped into the cleft. The rock walls closed in around me, narrow and suffocating. I moved forward, the torch casting flickering shadows that made the stones seem alive. The air grew colder, damper, and I could hear water dripping somewhere in the darkness ahead. The path descended, winding deeper into the earth. My breath echoed off the walls, and I had the sudden, irrational fear that I was being swallowed, that the mountain would close around me and I would never find my way out. But I kept walking, because turning back wasn't an option anymore. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, the passage opened into a cavern, and there, covering the walls like frozen starlight, was silver. Pure, raw, beautiful. It reflected the torchlight in 1,000 directions, filling the cave with a soft, otherworldly glow. I stood there, transfixed. This was what my father had died for, what Lydia had suffered for, what Catherine had burned for. This silver, this wealth, this curse. I thought about taking more than I needed, thought about filling my pockets, securing my future, making sure I'd never be poor or desperate again. But then I remembered Naomi's words. The mountain does not forgive greed. I took a single sample, a piece no larger than my palm, and wrapped it in cloth. Then I turned and walked back the way I'd come. When I emerged from the cleft, Naomi was waiting. She looked at the small bundle in my hand and nodded. You have honor, she said. That is rare among your people. I don't know about honor, I said. I just know that I've seen what greed does, and I won't become like them. Naomi smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from her. Then we will ride together, she said, and we will watch Sloan burn. We returned to camp to find it in chaos. Adelaide was shouting orders, marshals were mounting horses, and Josiah was loading rifles with the speed of a man who'd done this 1,000 times before. What happened? I asked. Josiah looked up, his face grim. Sloan's men found us, he said. They're 3 miles out and closing fast. We need to leave now. Chief Whitehawk emerged from his lodge, armed with a bow and a quiver of arrows. You will not face them alone, he said. My warriors will ride with you. Adelaide shook her head. Chief, if your people get involved, the army will see it as an act of war. You'll lose everything. We have already lost everything, the chief said. Sloan has taken our land, our lives, our future. If this is war, then let it be war. At least we will die fighting. Within minutes, 50 Shoshone warriors were mounted and ready. We rode east, toward Fort Benton, with Sloan's men at our heels. The land blurred past, trees and rocks and rivers, everything moving too fast to process. I clung to my horse, my side screaming with pain, my mind focused on one thing: survival. Behind us, I heard gunfire. Sloan's men were closing the distance. I glanced back and saw them, 20 riders, maybe more, their horses foaming, their faces twisted with determination. Josiah pulled up beside me. When I say jump, he shouted over the thunder of hooves. You jump, you understand? I nodded. We crested a ridge, and suddenly the land dropped away into a steep ravine. At the bottom, a river churned white and violent. Josiah pointed. There's a crossing point 1/2 mile down, he yelled. We make it to the other side, we're in federal territory. Sloan's men can't follow. Adelaide led the way, her horse leaping over fallen logs and dodging boulders. The Shoshone warriors fanned out, providing cover, firing arrows at the pursuing riders. I saw one of Sloan's men fall, then another. We reached the crossing, a narrow ford where the river ran shallow over a bed of smooth stones. Adelaide plunged in first, her horse struggling against the current. Josiah went next, then me. The water was freezing, reaching up to my horse's chest, soaking through my clothes and making my teeth chatter. Behind us, Sloan's men reached the ridge. Their leader, a man I recognized from the cabin, Vernon Pike, raised his rifle and fired. The shot went wide, but it was close enough that I felt the air move beside my head. The Shoshone warriors reached the ford and turned, creating a barrier between us and Sloan's men. Chief Whitehawk raised his bow and shouted something in his language. His warriors echoed him, a war cry that rang across the valley. Vernon Pike pulled his horse to a stop. He stared at the warriors, at the drawn bows, at the river that separated them from us. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Vernon lowered his rifle. "This isn't over," he shouted across the water. "Sloan will find you. He always does." "Then let him try," Naomi shouted back. She was beside her father, her own bow drawn. "Tell Sloan that the Shoshone remember, and we do not forgive." Vernon Pike turned his horse and rode away, his men following. The Shoshone warriors held their position until the last rider disappeared over the ridge. Then, and only then, did they lower their weapons. Chief Whitehawk rode to Adelaide. "You have your proof," he said. "Use it well. And when Sloan falls, send word. I want to know that justice, your justice, finally means something." Adelaide nodded. "I will," she promised. "And thank you, Chief, for everything." The chief looked at me. "Your father was a good man, Iris Brennan," he said. "He understood that some things are worth more than silver, worth more than gold. I hope you understand that too." "I do," I said. "I promise you, I do." We crossed the river and rode hard for Fort Benton. By nightfall, we could see the lights of the fort in the distance, a beacon of safety in a land that had tried to kill us at every turn. Adelaide pulled her horse beside mine. "We made it," she said. "Against all odds, we actually made it." I looked back at the land we'd crossed, at the mountains where my mother waited, at the rivers and valleys and hills that had taken so much from me. "We're not done yet," I said. "Not until Sloan pays." Adelaide smiled. "No," she said. "We're not done." "But we're close, Iris. We're so close I can taste it." We rode through the gates of Fort Benton as the last light faded from the sky. Soldiers surrounded us, rifles ready, demanding to know who we were and what we wanted. Adelaide dismounted and walked straight to the commanding officer. "I need to see Colonel Silas Hayes," she said. "Tell him Adelaide Mercer is here, and tell him I have evidence that will bring down Gareth Sloan." The officer hesitated, then nodded. He sent a runner, and within minutes, a man emerged from the largest building in the fort. He was in his 50s, graying hair, sharp eyes, the bearing of someone who'd spent his life giving orders and expecting them to be obeyed. "Colonel Hayes," Adelaide said. "We need to talk." The colonel looked at her, then at Josiah, then at me. His eyes widened. "Webb," he said. "Josiah Webb. I thought you were dead." "Not yet," Josiah said, "but I will be if you don't help us." The colonel's expression hardened. Inside, he said, "All of you. And someone better start explaining what the hell is going on." We followed him into a small office, furnished with a desk, chairs, and maps covering every wall. The colonel closed the door and turned to face us. "Talk," he said. So we did. Adelaide explained the map on my back, the illegal mining, the murders. Josiah corroborated every detail, adding his own testimony about the night his family died. And I showed the colonel the silver sample, proof that everything we were saying was true. When we finished, Colonel Hayes sat down heavily in his chair. "If this is real," he said, "if even half of what you're telling me is true, then Gareth Sloan has committed enough crimes to hang 10 times over. But I can't arrest him without a federal judge's warrant. And every judge in Montana is either bought or terrified." "Then we don't use a judge," Adelaide said. "We use the people." The colonel frowned. "What are you proposing?" "A town trial," Adelaide said. "We gather the citizens of Silver Creek, we present the evidence, and we let them decide. If 2/3 vote guilty, Sloan loses his land, his assets, everything. It's legal under territorial law." The colonel shook his head. "Sloan will never agree to that." "He will if we make it public," Adelaide said. "If we announce it in every newspaper, every town square. If we make it impossible for him to refuse without looking guilty. Sloan's power comes from fear and secrecy. We take that away, and he's just another man. The colonel looked at Josiah. What do you think? Josiah met his gaze. I think it's the only chance we have, he said, and I think it's worth the risk. The colonel stood and walked to the window, staring out at the fort's parade ground. All right, he said finally. I'll support this. But if it goes wrong, if Sloan walks free, every person in this room is a dead man or woman. Then we make sure it doesn't go wrong, I said. The colonel turned and looked at me. You've got courage, girl, he said. Let's hope it's enough. That night, we made plans. Adelaide drafted notices that would be posted in every town within 100 miles. Josiah wrote letters to people he'd helped over the years, calling in favors, asking for support. And I sat by the window holding my father's locket and prayed that we weren't about to make the biggest mistake of our lives. Tomorrow, we would ride to Silver Creek. Tomorrow, we would face Gareth Sloan. And tomorrow, one way or another, this would end. Silver Creek was a town built on lies. I could see it the moment we rode in, past the false-fronted buildings and the painted signs promising prosperity that would never come. The main street was wide and dusty, lined with saloons and shops, and the kind of desperation that settles over a place when the people living there have given up on anything better. We arrived at dawn, when the town was just waking, when smoke was beginning to rise from chimneys and storekeepers were unlocking doors. Adelaide had sent word ahead, messengers riding through the night to spread the news. There would be a trial, a reckoning, and every citizen had the right to attend, to hear the evidence, to cast their vote. By the time the sun was fully up, the town square was filled with people, miners and shopkeepers, ranchers and railroad workers, women with children on their hips, and old men who remembered when this land was still wild and free. They came because they were curious, or angry, or simply tired of being afraid. And they came because Adelaide Mercer, daughter of the late governor, had promised them something they'd stopped believing in: justice. A platform had been built in the center of the square, rough wood hastily nailed together, but solid enough to hold. Colonel Hayes stood on it in full uniform, his presence lending authority to what would otherwise be just another mob gathering. Beside him stood Adelaide, composed and elegant despite having slept in her clothes and ridden for 3 days straight. And beside Adelaide stood me. I felt exposed up there, visible to every eye in the crowd, my borrowed clothes and bandaged side marking me as a victim before I'd even opened my mouth. But Josiah had insisted. They need to see you, he'd said that morning. They need to see what Sloan does to people who stand against him. Josiah himself stood at the edge of the platform, rifle in hand, his eyes constantly scanning the crowd for threats. Naomi Whitehawk was there too, representing her father, her presence a silent reminder that this fight was bigger than just one man's greed. Colonel Hayes raised his hand and the crowd quieted. Citizens of Silver Creek, he began, his voice carrying across the square. We are gathered here today to conduct a trial under territorial law. The accused is Gareth Sloan, charged with murder, theft, illegal mining, and conspiracy. Under the Montana Territorial Code of 1887, if 2/3 of the assembled citizens find the accused guilty, his assets will be seized and distributed to those he has wronged, and he will be banished from the territory permanently. The crowd murmured, a low rumble of surprise and skepticism. Gareth Sloan was the richest man in Montana, the most powerful. The idea that he could be brought down by a vote seemed impossible. The accused has been notified, Colonel Hayes continued. He has been given the opportunity to defend himself, and he has chosen to attend. A ripple went through the crowd. People turned, craning their necks to see. And there, riding down the main street on a black horse worth more than most people's homes, was Gareth Sloan. He was not what I expected. I'd imagined a monster, someone whose cruelty would be written on his face. But Sloan looked ordinary. He was in his 50s, well-dressed in a dark suit, his hair silver, his face lined but handsome. He rode with the confidence of a man who'd never lost anything he couldn't buy back. Behind him rode Vernon Pike and a dozen other men, all armed, all watching the crowd with the cold eyes of people who killed for a living. Sloan dismounted and walked to the platform. Colonel Hayes stepped back, giving him space. Sloan looked at Adelaide, at me, at Josiah. His expression never changed. Calm, almost amused. This is quite the show you've put on, Miss Mercer, he said. His voice was smooth, educated. The voice of a man who'd spent years learning how to charm and manipulate. But I'm afraid you've wasted everyone's time. I've committed no crimes, I've broken no laws, and I certainly haven't murdered anyone. Then you won't mind if we present our evidence? Adelaide said. Sloan smiled. By all means. Let's hear what lies you've concocted. Adelaide stepped forward and addressed the crowd. 16 years ago, she began, a mining engineer named Daniel Brennan discovered a silver vein running beneath 3 parcels of land: Shoshone territory, federal land, and a parcel claimed by Gareth Sloan. But Sloan's claim was fraudulent, obtained through bribery and forgery. Daniel Brennan had proof of this, and so Gareth Sloan had him killed. Sloan laughed. Proof? Where is this proof? Daniel Brennan died in a mining accident. It was investigated. It was ruled accidental. The proof, I said, stepping forward, is on my back. The crowd went silent. I could feel hundreds of eyes on me, could feel their doubt, their skepticism. These people had no reason to trust me. I was just another stranger making accusations. But I didn't care. I pulled off my coat, then my shirt, turning so the crowd could see the tattoo. The map my father had carved into my skin, the last thing he'd done before Sloan murdered him. This is a topographical map, I said, my voice shaking but steady. It shows the exact location of the silver vein, and it proves that the vein runs primarily through Shoshone land, with only a small portion touching Sloan's claim. For 16 years, Gareth Sloan has been illegally mining silver that doesn't belong to him, and he's killed anyone who threatened to expose him. I pulled my shirt back on and turned to face Sloan. He killed my father. He kidnapped my mother and held her prisoner for 16 years. He murdered my Aunt Catherine and burned her alive in her own home. And 3 months ago, he killed the husband of Naomi Whitehawk because that man discovered the truth about the mines. Naomi stepped forward. Her voice was quiet, but it carried. My husband was a good man, she said. He had no interest in silver or gold. He only wanted to protect our land, our people. And Sloan's men shot him in the back and left him to die in the dirt like an animal. The crowd was listening now, really listening. I could see it in their faces, the way they were looking at Sloan with new eyes. Sloan's smile faded. This is absurd, he said. A tattoo isn't proof of anything. It could have been put there yesterday. And as for these wild accusations, they're the desperate lies of people who want what I've built, people who are jealous of my success. Then explain this, Adelaide said, and she held up a small bag. Inside was the silver sample I'd taken from the sacred cave. She opened the bag and poured the silver onto a wooden table on the platform. This sample was taken from Shoshone land 3 days ago. I have a federal assayer's report confirming it's from the same vein Sloan has been mining, the same vein marked on Iris Brennan's back. Sloan's jaw tightened. That proves nothing. Silver is silver. Adelaide pulled out another document. This is a land survey from 1875, she said. It shows that the parcel you claim to own was actually federal land, set aside for future Shoshone use. The deed you've been using is a forgery. I have the original in the territorial archives, and it's signed by a man who was convicted of fraud and hanged in 1876. The crowd began to murmur again, louder this time, angry. Sloan looked around, and for the first time, I saw uncertainty in his eyes. You can't prove any of this, he said. You can't prove I knew the deed was fraudulent. You can't prove I killed anyone. All you have are stories and circumstantial evidence. Josiah stepped forward. I can prove it, he said. Everyone turned to look at him. Sloan's face went pale. 12 years ago, Josiah said, you sent men to my home. They locked the doors and set fire to the house while my wife and daughter were inside. I was tracking you at the time, trying to bring you to justice. When I came home, there was nothing left but ashes and bones. I spent 12 years hunting you, Sloan. 12 years gathering evidence. And I have testimony from 3 of your former employees, men who witnessed your crimes, men who are willing to swear under oath that you ordered those killings. Sloan's hands clenched into fists. You're lying, he said. Am I? Josiah reached into his coat and pulled out a stack of papers. These are sworn affidavits. Signed, dated, witnessed. One of them is from a man named Marcus Vale. You remember Marcus, don't you, Sloan? He was your most loyal enforcer, right up until you tried to have him killed because he knew too much. Sloan's composure cracked. His face flushed red and he took a step toward Josiah. You have no right, he hissed. No right to judge me. You're just a washed up marshal who couldn't protect his own family. Josiah didn't flinch. Maybe, he said, but at least I didn't murder them. The crowd erupted. Voices rose in anger and shock. People shouting questions, demanding answers. Colonel Hayes raised his hands, calling for order, but it took several minutes before the noise died down. When it was finally quiet again, Adelaide addressed the crowd. You've heard the evidence, she said. You've seen the proof. Now it's time to vote. All in favor of finding Gareth Sloan guilty of the crimes he's been accused of, raise your hand. For a moment, nothing happened. The crowd stood frozen, hundreds of people afraid to be the first to act, afraid of what Sloan might do if he walked free. Then, slowly, a hand rose. An old woman near the front, her face lined with age and hardship. Then another hand, a young miner, his clothes still dusty from his morning shift. Then more, dozens, hundreds. I watched as the sea of hands grew, as people who'd been silent for years finally found their voice. I saw shopkeepers and ranchers, mothers and children, men who'd worked in Sloan's mines, and women who'd lost husbands to his greed. All of them raising their hands, all of them voting for justice. Colonel Hayes counted. When he was done, he turned to Sloan. By a vote of 247 to 53, he said, you have been found guilty. Your assets are hereby seized. Your land claims are revoked, and you are banished from Montana territory, effective immediately. Sloan stood there, his face a mask of disbelief. This isn't legal, he said. You can't do this. It's done, Adelaide said. And if you set foot in this territory again, you'll be arrested and tried in a federal court, where the penalty for murder is hanging. Sloan looked around at the crowd, at the faces of people who'd feared him for so long, and I saw something break inside him. Not his pride, not his arrogance, but something deeper. The certainty that he would always win, that he was untouchable, that the world would always bend to his will. Vernon Pike stepped forward. Boss, he said quietly, we should go. Sloan nodded slowly. He looked at me, his eyes empty. You think you've won, he said, but you've lost more than you know. That silver, that land, it's cursed. It destroys everyone who touches it. Your father learned that, your mother learned that, and you'll learn it too. I met his gaze. Maybe, I said, but at least I'll learn it free. Sloan turned and walked to his horse. Vernon Pike and the other men followed. They mounted and rode out of town, watched by hundreds of silent witnesses. And as the dust settled behind them, I felt something loosen in my chest. Something that had been coiled tight for as long as I could remember. It was over. Gareth Sloan was gone. And for the first time in my life, I could breathe without fear. 3 months later, I stood on the porch of Josiah's cabin and watched the sun rise over land that finally felt like it might be home. The wound in my side had healed, leaving a scar that pulled when I moved too quickly but no longer hurt. My hands had calluses now from working with Josiah, repairing fences and tending to the small herd of cattle he'd been neglecting for years. I learned to shoot well enough that I could hit a target at 100 yards. I learned to ride without thinking about it, to read the weather in the clouds, to find my way through country that had once seemed impossible to navigate. But more than that, I'd learned what it meant to stop running. Lydia was inside, making breakfast. Josiah had brought her up from the cellar the day after the trial, and she'd stepped into the sunlight for the first time in 12 years. It had been hard for her, those first few weeks. The light hurt her eyes. The open space made her dizzy. She'd had nightmares every night, waking up screaming, convinced she was back in the cage. But slowly, day by day, she'd healed. Her skin lost its corpse pallor. Her hands stopped shaking. She learned to walk without flinching, to speak without whispering. She wasn't whole, not yet, and maybe she never would be. But she was alive, and that was enough. The door opened behind me, and Lydia emerged, carrying 2 cups of coffee. She handed me one and stood beside me, both of us looking out at the land that had almost killed us. Letter came yesterday, she said, from Adelaide. I took a sip of coffee. What did it say? Lydia smiled. She wants you to come to Helena. Says she has a job for you, running the operations at the silver mine. I almost choked on my coffee. What? The mine's been placed under federal protection, Lydia explained. The Shoshone tribe gets 40% of the profits. The rest goes to the families Sloan harmed. But someone needs to manage it. Someone who knows the land, who can work with the Shoshone, who won't get greedy. And she thinks that's me, I said. Lydia looked at me. I think it's you too, she said quietly. You've spent your whole life running from that mine, from what it represents. Maybe it's time to stop running. Maybe it's time to turn it into something good. I didn't know what to say. The idea of going back to that silver vein, of standing in the place where my father had died, where so much blood had been spilled, it terrified me. But it also felt right, like closing a circle, like finishing something that had been left undone for too long. What about you? I asked. What will you do if I leave? Lydia's smile widened. I'm not going anywhere, she said. Josiah offered to let me stay here as long as I want. And I think I'd like to stay. For a while, at least. I've spent 16 years in the dark. I'd like to spend some time in the light. I hugged her, this woman who was my mother but still felt like a stranger in so many ways. We were learning each other, piece by piece, building a relationship from nothing. It was slow work, hard work, but it was worth it. That afternoon, Josiah and I rode out to check the fences on the northern edge of his property. The land was quiet, peaceful, the kind of quiet that comes after a storm has passed. We worked in comfortable silence, the way we'd learned to work over the past 3 months. Josiah wasn't a man who needed words. He spoke through actions, through the care he took with small things, through the way he'd wake up in the middle of the night to check that the doors were locked and we were safe. When we finished, we sat on a ridge overlooking the valley and shared a canteen of water. Josiah stared out at the horizon, his expression distant. Adelaide's right, he said. About the job. You should take it. I don't know if I'm ready, I admitted. You'll never be ready, Josiah said. That's not how life works. You just do the thing and figure out how to survive it afterward. I smiled. Is that what you did after your family died? Josiah was quiet for a long time. No, he said finally. I ran. I hid. I spent 12 years waiting to die. And then you showed up, bleeding on my land, and I realized I was tired of waiting. I wanted to live again, even if it hurt. He looked at me. You gave me that, Iris, you and Lydia. You reminded me that there's more to life than revenge, more than anger. You reminded me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose to keep going. I felt tears prick my eyes. Thank you, I said. For everything. Josiah stood and offered me his hand. Come on, he said. Let's go home. That night, I sat by the fire and wrote a letter to Adelaide. I told her I'd take the job. I told her I'd come to Helena and do whatever it took to make that mine into something more than a monument to greed. I told her I was ready to stop being a victim and start being a builder. 2 weeks later, I packed my belongings into a single bag. Lydia cried when I said goodbye, but they were good tears, the kind that come from love rather than loss. Josiah didn't cry. He just handed me a rifle and said, in case you need it. I rode to Helena with Naomi Whitehawk at my side. She'd agreed to be my partner in running the mine, representing the Shoshone interests while I handled the federal side. We were an unlikely pair, a white woman and a Shoshone woman trying to build something together in a territory that had spent a century tearing people apart. But we were determined, and we were willing to fail if it meant trying. Helena was bigger than I expected, a sprawling city built on gold and ambition. Adelaide met us at the edge of town, dressed in the formal clothes of her new position. Her father had died, but his legacy lived on in her. She'd been appointed acting governor, the first woman to hold the position in Montana Territory. It was temporary, she told me in her letters, just until the next election. But I had a feeling Adelaide Mercer was exactly where she was supposed to be. Welcome to Helena, she said, shaking my hand. Ready to change the world? I looked at the city, at the people moving through the streets, at the mountains rising in the distance. I thought about my father, who'd believed the truth could outlive lies. I thought about Catherine, who'd given her life to keep me safe. I thought about Lydia, learning to live again after 12 years in the dark. And I thought about Josiah, a broken man who'd found redemption in the most unlikely place. Yes, I said, I'm ready. The mine was exactly as brutal as I'd imagined. Dark, dangerous, a place where men broke their backs for silver they'd never own. But over the months that followed, Naomi and I started to change it. We improved the safety conditions. We paid fair wages. We hired Shoshone workers alongside white workers and made it clear that anyone who had a problem with that could find employment elsewhere. It wasn't perfect. There were fights, resentments, people who resisted every change. But slowly, grudgingly, the mine became something different. Not just a place of extraction, but a place of opportunity. A place where people could work with dignity. A year after the trial, I received word that Gareth Sloan had died. He'd been found in a boarding house in Oregon, penniless and alone, his body ravaged by illness. Vernon Pike had stayed with him until the end, one of the few people who hadn't abandoned him when his money ran out. I didn't know how to feel about Sloan's death. Part of me wanted to feel satisfaction, to feel like justice had been served, but mostly I just felt empty. Sloan had spent his life accumulating power and wealth, and in the end, it had all meant nothing. He died alone, forgotten. His empire crumbled to dust. I thought about visiting his grave, about saying something profound or meaningful, but in the end, I decided against it. Sloan didn't deserve any more of my time. He'd taken enough. Instead, I went back to the mine, back to the work, back to the slow, difficult process of building something that would last longer than any one person's greed or ambition. Naomi and I became friends, then something closer than friends. Sisters, maybe, bound not by blood, but by shared purpose. She taught me about Shoshone culture, about the way her people saw the land not as property, but as family. And I taught her about navigating the white world, about using its laws and systems to protect what mattered. Together, we created something neither of us could have created alone. 2 years after I came to Helena, I rode back to Josiah's cabin. It was spring, the land green and alive, wildflowers blooming in meadows that had been brown and dead when I first arrived. Lydia met me at the door, her face bright with health, her eyes clear. "She looks good," I said to Josiah that evening as we sat on the porch. "She's happy," Josiah said. "That's more than I ever thought possible." "And you?" I asked. "Are you happy?" Josiah considered the question. "I'm not tortured," he said. "That's close enough." I laughed. I'd learned that was as close to contentment as Josiah Webb would ever get. We sat in silence as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, and I realized that this, right here, was what I'd been searching for my entire life. Not wealth, not revenge, not even justice exactly. Just peace. Just the simple knowledge that I'd survived, that I'd fought back, that I'd turned something terrible into something bearable. That night, Lydia gave me a gift. It was a book, leather bound with blank pages. "For your story," she said, "so you don't forget where you came from." "I won't forget," I promised. "But I will move forward," I thought. "I will keep building. I will keep trying." Because that's what my father would have wanted. That's what Catherine died for. That's what Lydia survived for. On my last morning at the cabin, I walked to the ridge where Josiah and I had sat all those months ago. I looked out at the land, at the valleys and mountains, at the endless sky. And I thought about all the people who'd fought for this place, who'd bled for it, who'd died for it. The land didn't care. It would outlast all of us, indifferent to our struggles and triumphs. But we cared. We fought because it mattered, because we mattered, because the future mattered. I pulled out my father's locket, the one Lydia had given me. Inside, beneath the photograph, were those words: "The truth lives longer than the liar." My father had been right. The truth had outlived Sloan. It had outlived the lies, the murders, the years of suffering. And now it was my job to make sure that truth meant something, to build a future where people didn't have to run, didn't have to hide, didn't have to carry maps on their skin because they couldn't trust the law to protect them. I rode back to Helena with hope in my chest and determination in my bones. The road was long, the work was hard, but I wasn't alone. I had Naomi. I had Adelaide. I had Lydia and Josiah watching from their cabin in the wilderness, believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself. 5 years after the trial, I stood at the entrance to the silver mine and looked at a plaque the workers had placed there. It read, "In memory of Daniel Brennan, who believed the truth lives longer than the liar." This mine stands as proof he was right. The mine had become more than profitable. It had become a model. Adelaide, now governor in her own right, used it as proof that fair treatment and profit could coexist. Naomi and I had built something neither of us could have built alone, a partnership that bridged two worlds. Lydia still lived with Josiah, her health restored, her nightmares fading. Josiah had finally put down his rifle, finally allowed himself to rest, and I had found something I'd never thought possible, a purpose that didn't require running. I traced the letters on the plaque with my fingers and felt my father's presence, not as a ghost, but as a legacy. He turned me into a weapon, but I turned myself into a builder. As I walked back to my office, past workers heading home, past the sun painting the mountains gold, I thought about that girl who'd woken in Josiah's cabin with a rifle pointed at her head. That terrified, wounded girl who'd had no idea what she was capable of. I wished I could tell her, "You're going to make it. You're going to do more than survive." I pulled out the journal Lydia had given me years ago and opened it to the first page. I'd never written in it, too afraid my words wouldn't be worthy. But now I picked up a pen and wrote, "My name is Iris Brennan. I survived. And this is what I built with the pieces." The sun set over Montana, over land that had seen blood and suffering, but also hope. And as long as there were people willing to fight, willing to build, willing to believe the truth mattered more than lies, we would endure. I closed the journal and went home. Not to run, not to hide, just to rest. Because tomorrow, the work would begin again, the end.